That is quite possibly the most hardcore Southern anecdote I have ever read. It's downright Shakespearean. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Get that coffee. Good to see y'all. Delicious. Hope you're staying warm wherever you are. It's a little chillier here in Florida, which is nice. Just really quick, some housekeeping for the $5 plus patrons on Patreon. I'm going to start doing polls for the next book to read, so you can all vote on which book I'm going to review next. Not for every review, but for some of them, so you'll have some input in the direction that the show goes. So it should be pretty cool. Again, that'll be for the $5 plus tier. You can click on the link below or go to patreon.com/books are better than food and donate $5 more per video. And I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very much. Also, I'm going to try to get more Patron-Only Reviews out in 2024. Definitely going to try and do more of those. Today is A Childhood, the biography of a place by the American author Harry Crews, published in 1978. This is his autobiography. For those not familiar with him, Harry Crews is an American Southern Gothic author. As this memoir explains, he was born in the 1930s and grew up in a family of Depression-era Georgian tenant farmers. He writes a distinct, strange, violent, masculine type of Southern Gothic fiction, sometimes nicknamed grit lit, the same category that would house Cormac McCarthy, William Gay, or Donald Ray Pollock, for example. All authors who have appeared on this channel. As has Crews. I reviewed a couple of his books, Feast of Snakes and All We Need of Hell. This is the best I've read by him, by far. His fictional stories are usually nihilistic Southern dark comedies about outcasts or freakish characters. I even have a little bit of his lilt coming through there, you know, when I describe that, just because the way he speaks is so imitatable. This autobiography, A Childhood, is the most serious book from him that I've read. The least humorous in a way. Not that it doesn't contain humor, it does, but what I mean is that it's the most sincere, and therefore the most powerful. It has the Americanic weirdness of Dennis Johnson, crossed with the terrestrial violence, like the base violence of Cormac McCarthy, along with the religious darkness of Flannery O'Connor and a little bit of the vulgar humor of Charles Bukowski. So if you like any of those authors, I highly suggest you pick this one up right away. It's like essential reading for, if you want to call it grit lit or Southern Gothic writing. I think it's essential for Southern Gothic writing for sure, maybe for American literature in general, because it is of that caliber. And it is of that caliber, in my opinion. It is that powerful. It is that important. It's demonstrably profound and does capture a time and place in an era which was really distinct and is now totally gone. You know, I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. So the only place you can really find it, the only place where you can really inhabit it and get an idea of what those people felt like and what it was like to be in that time with these characters, eccentric, strange, kind of base and violent as they were, while also being, you know, probably perfectly fine people, you're just not going to be able to find that in many places. You find that in this book. It's a time capsule. It's even if embellished, you know, because there's stuff in here that you just can't make up, right? His success as an author and as a professor at the University of Gainesville for 30 years seemed unlikely, given his background, as you'll hear about. But that background is why he's a very interesting author. His background is inseparable from him, and he'd be the first to say so, you know. They're really one and the same. They're inseparable. The place this guy grew up made him into what he is. And I think he credits the recognition that's the recognition of that truth as being the thing that really allowed him to become a successful author. In addition to being a successful novelist, he was also a successful journalist. He did work for Playboy and Esquire. So this memoir recounts him growing up in the American South, the rural American South in the 1930s in a place called Bacon County, Georgia, which is actually not even 5 hours away from where I sit right at this moment here in Tampa Bay, Florida. It's just right up there near the town of Alma. And I've never been through there. It seems to be quite off the map, but it's still there, of course, you know. The place in this book, his childhood home, is a place in America that many of us here in this country know existed, but none of us have experienced. An America that I'd wager you and I wouldn't recognize any more than we'd recognize the customs and lifestyles of those living in the Himalayas. I mean, it really was a completely different world. It was a completely different country, completely different. Filled with poverty and a dependence on and proximity to nature and animals in a manner that few of us, if not all of us, will never experience in our lives. I'll read you a little bit here. Very readable book, very readable out loud. I'm going to fall into that southern lilt. Ever since Mama first told me that story of the day they lost the cows, I have thought a great deal about my daddy in that time, of how tragic it was and how typical. The world that circumscribed the people I come from had so little margin for error, for bad luck, that when something went wrong, it almost always brought something else down with it. It was a world in which survival depended on raw courage, a courage born out of desperation and sustained by a lack of alternatives. In a beautiful, surreal fashion, the book begins with a memory that is the oldest one that Cruz has, but it's not his. It's his father's. While his father is in South Florida, building the Tamiami Highway through the Everglades, through the swamps, drinking with men who keep gators on chains, trying not to be killed by his co-workers, and apparently after sleeping with a Seminole prostitute, Seminole was the Native American tribe from that region, losing one of two very important male organs that would make you surprised that he went on to sire Harry and his brother. I think she gave him the clap, but he actually starts sleepwalking when he's a kid, and he wakes up one night in the middle of the field, under the moonlight in this, moonlit field. Very surreal moment in the book, very beautiful. Almost like it starts to kind of take on a little bit of like a magical realist tone in some areas, and I think Cruz was a fan of Borges, and so it's interesting to see what was going on there, in his mind as he was writing this. It doesn't have all the cliches that maybe one would anticipate of typical tropes. There's a lot of them, but then there's also this other tone, which is very, it's kind of one of amazement. It's kind of one of mystery and awe and fascination with the landscape and the people in a way that, he's a storyteller. It's not all so grim. Parts were just less grim than I anticipated, and that made the book really beautiful. That gave it this kind of interesting, balanced quality that is unusual for this kind of literature. And I think that's really why it makes it successful, is because it definitely humanizes all the characters, but it also makes the landscape appear like something so foreign that even if you live here, you've never been to this place, right? This is a totally different totally different country. So I thought that it was a real success in that fashion. I'd read it again. I probably will. Cruz is an embodiment of the rough, desperate, hard as nails, but beautiful and mysterious rural farming country of Bacon County, Georgia. Savagely marked by it, quite literally. That's why it's called, in part, the biography of a place. Because this distinct landscape, this environment, saturated Cruz. It's impossible to imagine him being from anywhere else. Some people are just like this. They're kind of like a sponge, or they're just so shaped by the intensity of the environment they came from that they exude it in every single thing they do. Others are kind of nomadic. They're sort of lost. They're weird. I fall more into that category. They're not really an embodiment of anything or anywhere. They're kind of a shapeshifter, a chameleon, whatever you want to call it, a traveler, a kind of a wanderer, right? So the book is filled with descriptions of the inhabitants and the culture. Musings on mules, southern superstition. He touches on the racism that was stark and open in the country, but for Cruz, it never stuck. How it didn't, as he puts it, is a mystery. Everyone around him was a racist, including members of his family. But in spite of the racism of the South, Cruz grew up being friends with a little black boy named Willie Booker T and his family. The act of storytelling seemed to have come naturally for Cruz, and he describes he and his friend Willie going through a Sears and Roebuck catalog, and together they would make up narratives for the people in the advertisements, right? In this world that was so completely different from theirs, creating backstories for them. Kind of gives you an idea of how how impoverished the area was. There is a cruel joke that Harry and his brother play on Willie in the book, but the revenge joke that Willie plays on Harry is so brutal. It's very funny. Country kids, you don't want to mess with them, man. Bacon County seemed like it was a truly dangerous place, if just because of, the lack of doctors, but also because at that time, people solved their own problems, if you get my drift. It was considered particularly humiliating for any man to go to the law and sort out his issues with other men, right? So this meant people would literally just kill people, and that was that. I mean, for example, and this was just, all right. Up in Jeff Davis County, just about where I was born and raised, a woman's husband was killed, and she, 7 months pregnant, was the only witness to the killing. When the sheriff tried to get her to name the man who'd done it, she only pointed to her swelling stomach and said, "He knows who did it, and when the time comes, he will settle it." And that was all she ever said. Dude, that is quite possibly the most hardcore Southern anecdote I have ever read. It's downright Shakespearean. But in spite of the adversity that the folks in this place faced, including Harry and his family, his tone is never one of complaint. He never seems like he's complaining. Rather, he tells the story with this sense of wonder, right? Of awe. The way in which he captures the landscape and people and culture is outstanding. It's magical. It's filled with tradition and superstition, not without a pagan quality, plus, the addition of Jesus, of course. Particularly in the last scene, as you'll see, when Harry curses the hot Georgia sun. There's that pagan quality to the culture and land, the importance of religion and the earth. Literally the earth, which provides them with what they sell for money and eat for food. And the sun, of course, which makes it all possible. It reminded me of The Wicker Man, which is one of my favorite movies. Another anecdote, I love this one, very memorable, and actually I've linked to a clip of Harry relating this anecdote in person below. When he's eating dinner over at Willa Lee's one evening, and his mother, who's nicknamed Auntie, cooks possum, he sees how the possum is prepared, right? So Willa Lee's mother, after preparing the possum, separates the guts and what have you, and buries them in a hole out back in the dirt, but separates the possum's eyes, and also buries them in the dirt, but facing down. Because, as she puts it to little Harry, when that possum comes looking for you, he'll be facing the wrong way, so you don't have anything to worry about. He's facing the wrong direction, so when he wakes up, he'll never find you. How to scare the shit out of a little kid. I think there's some anecdote about them giving him the brains because he's the guest and it's considered a delicacy. So, Southern possum brains. Man. Brunswick stew. I never had that, but I'd try it. Fuck it. Like much of America, this place, this culture is gone, but just gone, right? It was living and breathing not too long ago, and there are still probably traces. In this autobiography, he paints a grim but beautiful portrait of this world, culturally distinct, impoverished but filled with a kind of raw, inimitable spirit. But again, it was rough. Harry suffered plenty. At one point, he experiences what they deemed to be infant paralysis. It was probably polio, and his feet pull in backwards, toward his butt. And they stayed that way for a year. The doctor said that he'll never walk again, People would come by the house just to gawk at him, and he experienced at a very young age, I think he was 5 or 6, what it was like to be a freak, basically. An outsider, an outcast. But a year later, he was walking again. Eventually, he healed. However, shortly after, though, he falls. It's an accident, but he falls into a vat of boiling water used for scalding pig carcasses to take the hair off, right? And a man grabs him and yanks him out, but the damage is already done. Over 2/3 of his body is burned. He describes the skin off his arm just falling into the grass along with his fingernails. Dude, the doctor said that if his head had gone underwater, he would be dead. So an easy childhood, it most certainly was not. This isn't even to speak of all the domestic drama in Harry's life. I share a dark thing in common with Harry Crews, and I suspect it's why this book resonates so heavily with me. We both lost our fathers when they were in their early 30s, and they both went almost the exact same way, in their sleep. I was 7 when it happened. Crews was just a baby when he lost his dad. He was actually sleeping in the bed with him, with his mother and brother, when it happened. That was not the case for me. I was living in a different state. My dad went to sleep and somewhere in there suffered an arrhythmia, never woke up. Like my father, Harry's dad went to sleep, had a massive heart attack and just never woke up. He'd worked himself to death in the field, just too beat down, even as a young man. It was a hard life. So his mother made the decision, which she regretted later, of marrying his father's brother, And this was the man who raised Harry and whom he thought was his dad, until the truth came out years later in a shotgun house in Jacksonville, Florida. Heartbreaking ending to their relationship too, just in kind of the anticlimactic way. This guy actually he was prone to drinking and fighting. And Cruz describes this perfect indentation of teeth on his face, which he never explained. Cruz can remember it. It was a perfect shape of teeth, like somebody bit his face. And you never figured out what happened behind it. But that's the kind of guy this guy was. I don't think he hit Cruz and his brother, but their mother and he would fight quite often, and that's what eventually she had it and took off and took the boys to Jacksonville. But teeth, I mean, can you imagine having like your dad's got like this, you never hear, like, it's never explained to you growing up with that, this like perfect shape of some guy's teeth in his face. Oh my God, it's just a fucking different world, man. He gets really drunk and gets in an argument with Harry's mom and shoots a gun in the house. And that does it for her. That's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and she takes the kids and she goes down to Jacksonville, Florida and gets a job in a cigar factory, rolling cigars. That period in Harry's childhood is also particularly interesting. And one of the greatest reading experiences of my life came as I was waiting to get the car fixed at a dealership in St. Petersburg, sitting at a Starbucks on a shitty business strip in a particularly uncomfortable wooden chair. What I mean to say is it's amazing how books possess the ability to drag you out of your surroundings into another world, right? To drag you out of your mundane surroundings into a world of fascination, to somewhere else, right? Somewhere completely else. So this part in the book, I love this part. And look, these are technically spoilers, but I don't think it's going to ruin the reading experience for you. It's just the way he tells it, what happens, it's really hard to spoil this book because I knew about a significant amount of this before I read the book, and it didn't spoil it for me at all. So if it does for you, my apologies, but it's not really about like the events per se. It's kind of about like how he relates the whole story. So yeah. But anyways, at this point, little Harry Cruz has been taken out of Georgia after his drunken stepfather shot the gun in the house. The camel's back was broken and his mother grabbed his brother and he and headed down to Jacksonville, Florida to go work in a cigar factory, rolling cigars. While he's down there, Harry convinces the butcher shop owner that he needs someone to clean the place. So he gives Harry a job, and this scene takes place one night while Harry's cleaning up behind the counter of the butcher shop. The day after I went to work for him, I was in the back scrubbing down the butcher's block and sweeping up the sawdust on the floor, because it was only about 20 minutes until quitting time, when a man came into the store and sprinted down between the aisles to where I was working. Everybody in the store stopped to watch. Such was the look in the man's face of raw, wild desperation. When he got to the back, he came right behind the counter and slid to a stop. He was wearing faded overalls, brogans, and a felt hat. His upper lip was weighted with a heavy, stained mustache. His wrists and hands seemed much too large for his emaciated body. "Knife," he said to me. "Knife," I said. "Where?" he said. "Butcher's block," I said. I was as motionless as a stuffed bird. Only my eyes moved, and they only moved to follow him. The customers from the store, including Mr. Joseph, who owned it, came rushing back to the meat counter. They were terrified as I was, and all we could do was watch as the man went to the butcher block and withdrew from a rack nailed into the side of it a very long knife, honed until the blade was thin and sharp as a razor. He brought the knife up and jammed it into his chest. Strangely, it did not go very deep. Everybody gasped, and one lady fainted when he made that first plunge. He walked in a little circle like a dog looking for a place to lie down. He walked that way for a long time, making a little track in the sawdust. The lady who fainted came around and was led away. Then the man stopped in his circle. He held the knife steady with one hand and struck it with the other hand, palm down, driving the blade a little deeper. "He's gonna puncture his heart," one of the ladies screamed. As if on signal, they all ran out of the store. Mr. Joseph, who owned the place, called back over his shoulder that he was going for the police. The man had started circling again, but he stopped. How come that feller to go for the police? He no longer looked angry or desperate, only very sad. The knife had calmed him down. I remember thinking it was like medicine. He'd run in here hurting, but he slipped that blade into his chest and the pain went away. How come him to go? His voice was little more than a whisper, his eyes wet and bright but calm. I don't think you allowed to do it, I said. What? He said. Stick yourself. When he spoke, his voice was subdued. I reckon I shouldn't have come in here and taken his knife. That's near about stealing. He casually raised his open hand and tapped the knife a little deeper. After he put another little bit of the blade in his chest, he almost smiled. The knife ain't how come to go for the police, I said. You can't stick your own self in a store out in the middle of the field or anywhere. It's against the law. Law ain't studying me, he said, beginning to circle again. You from Bacon County? I asked. It was the only thing I could think of to say. He smiled at me as he turned in his circle. Show now, boy. He tapped the knife a little more. He was really bleeding now. His overalls full of blood all the way to his knees. I'm from Bacon County too, I said, desperate to stop him. I'm a Pitfield, he said. I'm a Cruz, I said. I might know your people. I probably do. Mertice is my mama and Pascal is my daddy, I said, watching the door, hoping for Mr. Joseph and the police. I don't know, he said. I don't know. It is some cruises up around the Hurricane, I know. You don't need to do this, I said. You can always just quit and go on home. I was a little beside myself to think of something to get him to stop. Home, he said in a quiet, bemused voice, addressing whatever came before his eyes as he turned the circle. It ain't ne'er nail left in the world where my hat is welcome. He turned his eyes toward me. Come over here, boy. I stood where I was. Come on over here. I stepped closer. He leaned just perceptibly. You don't have to worry about this. I don't want you to worry about this. I didn't say anything. You know why it ain't no reason for you nor nobody else to worry about this? Why? I said. The knife feels good. God Almighty, I said. It feels good. He said something else, but I didn't hear him. I knew it was hopeless. I could not have said it then, but I knew in my bones that he was caught in a life where the only thing left to do was what he was doing. He had told himself a story he believed, or somebody else had told it to him, a story in which the next thing that happened, the only thing that could happen, was the knife. It was the next thing, the right thing, the only thing, and the knife felt good. If my life to that moment had taught me nothing else, it had made me understand exactly what he meant. Talking wasn't going to do any good. He took another little slap at the top of the knife and seemed to relax all along his bones as the blade went deep. His face grew calmer still. Well, I'm through with it all now, he said. He hit the knife particularly hard and he stopped in his circle as though he had run into a stone wall. I'm through with it. Somebody else is going to have to look after it. Like a folding chair closing, he sank slowly to his knees. He turned his face, the whitest face I'll ever see, toward me. I've killed myself, he said in a flat, matter-of-fact voice. He stayed just that way, on his knees, his bloodless face turned to me, as Mr. Joseph came running through the store with a policeman. As they came around the counter, the man gave himself a little more of the blade and pitched forward on his face into a ring of blood-soaked sawdust. The cop, red-faced and breathing heavily, walked over and turned his face out of the sawdust, glanced at it briefly, and stood up. I went over to Mr. Joseph and gave him my apron. Quittin', I said, and rushed out of the store. Now this is a fucked up scene, no doubt, with some dark comedy at the end there. But I will bet a lot of money that I am not the only guy to read that and have his eyes just fill up with tears. This kid, as if watching the specter of his future life in front of him winding down to its painful, bitter end, not only witnesses the man taking his own life, but he's having a conversation with him, a lucid conversation. And it's so rough. I mean, it's so brutal and painful and sad. I don't know. This one hit me particularly hard. Because what drives a man to do that in front of a kid, no less? I mean, and he's like trying to assure the kid like it's not so bad. It's just, it's so dark. It's so dark. But there was this weird, I mean, there was something that wasn't exploitative about it too, which came off with this sincerity of just like, I don't know, that kind of realism. I mean, it might be made up, you know, but I kind of bought it, and it's so sad, and yeah, I mean, but I loved it because that's amazing writing. That's amazing writing. You want to talk about a masterpiece of literature? That scene is perfection. And it's like when the knife pierced his chest, I could just hear that first low E string of the song Go Tell the Mountain by Jeffrey Lee Pierce, no pun intended, with Mark Lanegan singing on vocals, with Nick Cave on backing vocals, actually. I've linked to it below. I love that song. It's one of my favorites that Jeffrey Lee Pierce has ever written. But this version with Mark Lanegan is astounding. It has got to be one of the most profound reading experiences of my entire life. That scene in the butcher shop in Jacksonville was unbelievably moving to me. I mean, just like, if I wasn't in a public place, I probably would have just been fucking bawling, you know? I thought it was amazing, even if it's fake, even if it's made up, you know? Because it's possible that some of the anecdotes or stories in this book are embellished or totally fiction, who knows? But that part, even if it is fiction, was just so, like, I mean, I was gonna say it hits me there, but, you know. It was like this man was giving him an ominous warning as to what was in store for him in life as a man. I hate to say that decades later, when Cruz was in his 70s and near death, I think he thought of that same man and took some inspiration from him, unfortunately. As it says in Blood, Bone, and Marrow, the despair became too much one afternoon in the early summer of 2008. Harry picked up a hunting knife and plunged it into his stomach, dragging it upward toward his heart. He was discovered in a pool of blood and rushed to the hospital, where he would remain for several months. He told people that he had been stabbed in a late-night fight by a longtime rival. Friends questioned whether Harry wanted to die or whether the act was a plea for attention. Other attempts had preceded it, though with less devastating consequences. Delaney called him, and Harry admitted the truth about the incident, how he'd stabbed himself, somehow missing all the vital organs. "You are the most inept person I've ever met at killing yourself," Delaney told him. Dark comedy. Yeah, I don't know how you go through that and don't become completely changed as a human being. The whole book has the strong thematic element of fathers and sons. Time, place, history, the things that make up a person, as they did Cruz, so definitively. The whole work of the man, that is Cruz, seems to ask the question, well, Dad, here I am. Now what the hell am I doing here? And it's one that resonates heavily with me. He's certainly playing a character. His voice is incredible. In fact, it's hard not to start speaking that Georgian drawl when I'm watching or listening to him. And he's said the same thing about himself. He begins listening to other people long enough and he starts to speak like them, you know, this mimicry thing. He's an actor, in a way. And sure, he might be making some stuff up in his autobiography, or at least embellishing things. He is a writer, after all. But if you can appreciate the story of an artist overcoming the odds, or if you're at all interested in the dark past of rural Southern America, or folklore, and perhaps especially if you've got unresolved father issues, then pick it up and see what you find. Meditate on these ideas a while. It is the best memoir I have ever read. Tragic, almost mystical, and filled with jaw-dropping stories. It is incredible. Better than food. Check it out. So is it romancing pain? Is it romancing the grotesque, hard, brutal life of people in that time and place? It is using it to tell a good story. But if it is, my personal feeling is that if you lived through it and in spite of it, you can exploit the shit out of your own personal experience to your heart's content. That's the only reason any decent story was ever told. If nothing else could be said about Harry Cruz, one could most certainly say he worked with what he had. And he worked hard, which wasn't nearly important as the fact that he worked well. And he might be the first to tell you that, actually. Because he understood that working hard meant nothing if the finished product didn't work. In fact, there's a wonderful clip of him discussing something related to this below, wherein he confesses that 2 weeks prior to when he's speaking on camera, he threw away half a novel. Just chucked it. Been working on it, realized it didn't work, threw it away. As he puts it, the coward will try and make it work. The artist, he takes that fucking stack of shitty writing and throws it in the fire. And then he does it all over again. He was taught that by Andrew Nelson Little, the fellow who taught Flannery O'Connor. In the days when he was still a student, Harry gave him one of his manuscripts to read. Little read it and said, "Burn it, son. Fire's a great refiner." Isn't that just beautiful? There's writing that hurts in a bad way, in a nauseating, atrocious, deliberately cruel manner. And there's writing that hurts in a good way, in a tragic, painful, yet honest and true manner. Both are valid. Both are tough to read. And both can be great writing. Harry's is composed of the former, but ultimately is the latter. The kind that hurts in a good way. Better than food. Check it out. If you're a fan of Flannery O'Connor, Hemingway, Cormac McCarthy, and Charles Bukowski, get it immediately. Coffee time. Thank you very much, all my patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Ben C. Thank you very much, Ben. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive A Childhood, the Biography of a Place by Harry Cruz, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And I hope you love both. Cheers. Please subscribe if you have not already and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this. And always remember, die reading. All right. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. Happy holidays. Talk to you soon. Ciao.